Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jasmine Hall. I am the Advocacy and Leadership Coordinator for Uri Litzedek. Today we are gathered for Rabbi Avidan Freedman's talk, Settler Violence, what is happening, why, and what needs to be done. Avidan Freedman is one of the founders and the director of Yanshoof, an organization dedicated to ending Israel's arms sales to human rights violators, as well as an educator at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He is also an activist who has offered a religious voice on issues relating to Israel and its moral responsibilities. He received semicha from the Israeli chief rabbinate and from Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, and lives in Efrat with his wife and their 5 children. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rabbi, and feel free to take it away.
Shalom. Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. It's good to be with everyone to talk about this very difficult topic. And one part um, of what's difficult about it, and specifically in this context, is that I don't know who is here. I don't know who the audience is. So I want to do something a little bit unorthodox. I studied at the Open Orthodox Yeshiva, so I don't know where this fits into that. But I want to ask, I want to ask right now for people to chime in with the questions that they have on this topic and what they're hoping to learn. But before you do that, um, I want to say that while the title, "What's Happening," why, and what needs to be done sounds very concrete and very, very practical. Actually, I was asked to share Torah. So when we're thinking about what's happening, why, and what needs to be done, the perspective I'm going to be taken is really is to speak about ideology, is to speak about thought, and less to get into the nitty-gritty details, numbers, statistics, etc. Again, everybody is in very different places, I think, as far as this issue is. It's an issue that unfortunately has been talked about a lot, but also, thank God, is being talked about a lot. But I wanted to ask just so I could have a sense of where people are. I want to invite everybody to throw out in the chat now, to write down questions or things you're hoping to get out of this or to learn more about as far as this topic. Okay, so I see that everybody is giving me just the you're giving me a blank check here to move forward. Okay. Now some things are coming up. Um, okay, fantastic. Okay. Yes. So I will say it definitely also pains me. Um, I'm coming off of just this afternoon. I went to a visit to visit some Palestinians who live literally 5 minutes away from where I live here in Efrat, right outside in Wadi Rachil, to hear about what they are suffering from really on a daily basis, with a group of 10 other um, residents of Efrat. Um, okay, I just want to share here for a second, just a second. Um, so I want to share a, okay, do we all see this now? Is that okay? Yeah. Um, so what's happening, why, and what needs to be done. So I'll be honest, Jasmine knows this. When I saw the initial advertisement, all of a sudden I was shocked. I was like, "Oh my God, wait, who named that settler violence. Who gave it that name? Just a little over a week ago, I was part of a group here in Gush Etzion that organized a conference. That thank God got a lot of coverage. Actually, just tonight on the one of the main Israeli news channels, there was a piece about it. And before that conference, a little over a week ago, one of the rabbis who was supposed to speak called me up and he said, I just want to make sure that this isn't about alimut mitnachalim. This isn't about settler violence. We're not going to talk about settler violence. And there's a great sensitivity to that term. And then all of a sudden I said, I see that that's what my class is called. And I look back and I see, oh, wait a second. Actually, I named it. That was my name. I gave it the title settler violence. And so I realized, well, I'm just going to have to own it and to lean into it. But I want to say a word about what people have such a problem with in that title. But then I want to use it in order to really use this to frame our question, I think, in a very deep and fundamental way. People have a problem with settler violence because does that mean all settlers are violent? Settler violence is, if some people who are of a particular skin color are doing crimes. So do you say that that's, if the, settler violence, why is it called settler violence? Why isn't it called Jewish violence? Why isn't it called Israeli violence? Why are you generalizing in that way? Is that some kind of a statement about all settlers? As Jasmine mentioned, I live in Efrat. I'm a settler. So is the title settler violence saying that I am violent? I try not to be. But then, and here's where I want to take it a little bit deeper. Some would say, actually, well, yes, actually, the mere fact that you live in a settlement is already an act of violence. Living over the green line invites violence. It demands violence. It's a provocation. It's an obstacle to peace. That's already in and of itself the mere fact of settlement is already violence, and that's basically the argument made in the following quote, which I want to share with you. And the quote says, "It is wrong and inhuman to impose the Jews on the Arabs. What is going on in Palestine today cannot be justified by any moral code of conduct." And if I stop the quote right there, then it sounds like it's speaking about maybe settlers, the mere fact of settlers imposing their presence on Arabs in Palestine. But when we go a little bit further in the quote, so the quote continues, "Surely it would be a crime against humanity to reduce the proud Arabs so that Palestine can be restored to the Jews partly or whole as their national home." And now you understand that this quote is talking about something much more general than what we call now settlers. This quote is talking about settler as any Jewish settlement, the idea that Jews should be given a national home in part or in a whole in Israel is considered by this author to be a crime against humanity. This imposition of Jewish people in a land where the Arabs were living in Palestine, what was called Palestine. If we set this quote into context, so this is a quote actually by Mahatma Gandhi that he wrote in 1938. And when you think about this quote in 1938, so there's something quite horrifying about it because in the world, Jews are being shipped to the gas chambers, literally. In Israel, the Great Arab Revolt between 1936 and 1939 is going on. And within that context, Gandhi is saying that pre-state, of course, is saying that this idea of giving the Jewish people a state in Palestine would be a crime against humanity. it would be an imposition of violence. Um, but I want to take this extreme. I want to say the fundamental question is it's a question that needs to be taken seriously. The question is settler violence. Does settlement in Israel per se equal violence? And can there be a justification for that violence? That would be to take that title of settler violence and really to try to dig down deep into the dilemma that it poses. Now, on one extreme, as we see when we're looking here at Gandhi, this question can be taken to discredit the entire Zionist enterprise. And it is. It was in 1938. It is nowadays, to say that Jews being here in this land, in any part of it, is an act that is violent, that imposes violence. So on the one extreme, you have that. If you take it to one extreme, then you really erase any legitimacy for the entire Zionist enterprise. But if you take it to the other extreme people would say is, well, if all settlement is violent, then that's just what it is, and that's just what we need to do to survive. And if you take this idea to the other extreme, then it can, be taken to justify really any and all violence in the service of our survival here. And so what I want to say is, if we want to understand what's happening and why, part of it is this, that after the trauma of October 7th, Israelis found ourselves in a moment of existential threat from a threat that we didn't think could possibly pose a real existential threat. Because even if people understood that Hamas doesn't like us, wants to attack us, people didn't feel and didn't think that was a real existential threat, that could threaten the existence of Israel. And October 7th was this trauma that it could. And it shook people and created this profound sense of insecurity, which pushes people to a place which says, you know what we need to do to survive, we're going to do it. Because, if any settlement, even settlements in the south, in the southern Negev, all of those kibbutzim, those peace-loving kibbutzim, could also be considered violent and could invite this violence, well, we need to do whatever we need to do in order to survive. And what that led to was a sense of I think a kind of a public sentiment which says that if what we need to do to guarantee that there won't be another October 7th is to dot all of Judea and Samaria, all of the West Bank with farms, and that is what's going to protect people from the next October 7th, then so be it. That's, in terms of what's happening and why, that's just to understand what's going through people's heads and why the groundwork that is created for this settler violence that we're talking about is something that became mainstream or had a significant amount of support. That's a big part of it. Part of it is also people are exhausted. Part of it is that people have their minds in other places. But part of it is really this sentiment which people say, we are afraid for our lives, and we're going to support things which we think are going to guarantee our survival. But that's not the sentiment that's actually propelling the avant-garde of what's going on. That is kind of what's giving the fertile ground in order to let it sprout. But the ideology that's pushing the avant-garde on the ground, the people who are actually committing these acts of violence, these acts of, and if we go back to the title, if I would give a more accurate title than settler violence, the more accurate title for this talk would be Jewish terror with tacit support of the Israeli army, Jewish terror with the encouragement of government ministers. That would be the more accurate title of what we're talking about here. But the people who are actually committing it um, is are um, are motivated by more than just security concerns. They're motivated by a radical, revolutionary, messianic philosophy. Um, I myself am I consider myself to be a messianist. I'm somebody who, as a religious Zionist Jew, someone who grew up in the religious Zionist movement, every Shabbat I say Amen to the prayer for the state of Israel, which says, as the rabbinate decided at the beginning of the founding of the state, that the state is Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu. It's the beginning of the flowering of the redemption. But the messianism that I grew up in the religious Zionist movement, in Bnei Akiva, the messianism that I believe in is a messianism that is gradualist. That's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary. It's a messianism that says that we need to move forward step by step through natural evolutionary means. But going back, and some people, when they think about messianic philosophy, so they go back and they think about Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, think about Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook's son, who was the one of the main ideologues of the settler movement of Gush Emunim. They talk about Rabbi Kook. Some people who talk about contemporary radical messianism talk about figures like Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, who's very significant. Who's a very significant ideologue in the modern hilltop youth and Na'arei HaGvaot. But the truth is that we can go back much, much further in order to see these the beginnings of radical revolutionary messianic philosophy. Um, and the person who I want to look at is was a poet who is seen by his followers on the radical right as something of a prophet. And here's one small quote. His name was Uri Tzvi Greenberg. And one small quote to give a taste and a sense of this philosophy and the ideology that is propelling the actions that we're seeing. That again, they're happening. I met with people who are experiencing these these behaviors every day and every night on a small scale, but enough to terrorize. So we talk about the range of terror activities we've seen in recent weeks. It has gotten to murder on several occasions, but all of the time there are small acts of terrorizing in order to make life untenable, to make life unlivable for just the average Arab, the average Palestinian who is living. The people who we visited were people who have been neighbors of Efrat for tens and tens of years. The area has been there before Efrat was founded. So Uri Tzvi Greenberg, one quote of his: Zionism is an oriental movement of rebellion, of spiritual imperialism against several kingdoms, and it inspires itself to kingdom. He talks a lot about malchut, about kingdom. Zionism will not be saved until it achieves kingdom. The people en masse demand kingdom. And to its enemies, it prophesies, the land that we come to inherit is ours. Sit with us under the shade and eat its fruit. If you don't want to, see here, the great sea is open before you. There is no other Torah. Uri Tzvi Greenberg says, this is the Torah. This is, says in another famous poem of his, there is one truth. There is only one truth, and that truth is blood for blood. And that truth is that we need to come and we need to conquer, and we need to vanquish our enemies, and we need to expel our enemies. And that is the messianic revolutionary philosophy that is um, that's espoused without trying to hide it by the people who are really pushing the these activities. They say all of this land is ours. No Arabs have any rights to live in any part of it, and so they will go uh, into houses, into backyards, into wherever with the complete sense of this is all mine and I can do whatever I want. Complete sense of adnut, of ba'alut, of ownership over it. Um, and and these many of them are young, 15, 16 to 20-year old are the people who are committing the most of the acts and are who are leading most of the acts of extreme violence. Um, but they have the backing of older people, and then they have the backing of a certain sentiment of, well, this is what's needed um, for this is what's needed for our security. This is what's needed for us to survive. And here I want to say that this is a dynamic that it's very similar actually to what happened with the war in Gaza. Say what happened with the war in Gaza is that it started from a place of a legitimate war of self-defense. It started from a place of we need to defend ourselves against enemies who want to hurt us, who want to destroy us. It started based on real, reasonable security needs. But then the war was actually co-opted by those who connected those security needs and who piggybacked on those security needs in order to move forward a vision of complete expulsion of all Arabs from Gaza, complete conquest of all of Gaza and all of the land. And so while the war, as far as the security needs, could have probably finished, ended much, much earlier. And and strategically, we see that Israel gained in terms of strategic gains. It gained very little after the the first even 6 months of the war in terms of long-term strategic gains. Um, the war kept on being pushed on and on and on out of under these slogans of complete victory and under these statements of we are going to go and we're going to erase all of our enemies, and also we are going to go and we are going to conquer Gaza, we are going to resettle Gaza, and and so the legitimate security needs and legitimate goals of the war were ultimately taken advantage of and co-opted so that this thing which was very much in consensus was dragged into something which was much longer and more deadly on all sides, on as far as Israelis who lost their lives and were affected, and as far as Palestinians who lost their lives, um, as far as the destruction in Gaza. And and with the end of the war in Gaza, in many ways, what's happening and why is that same dynamic. In other words, the same sentiments of needing to defend ourselves, needing to create a perhaps new security measures in order to ensure that that Israeli settlements, that Israelis will not be attacked, won't be in danger, are then um, are then co-opted, are then co-opted in the service of this much more radical, this much broader, this much more revolutionary messianic vision of banishing all Arabs and of completely conquering and declaring sovereignty over every meter and every hill of the land of Israel in Judea and Samaria. So, for instance, when we had this conference and Avi Blut came to speak, he is the Aluf Pikud Merkaz, he's the officer in charge of Central Command in Israel. And he spoke at the conference, and he was extremely critical of illegal activities, of acts. He said, we need to call it as it is. These are acts of Jewish terror. They're against the law. They're, um, there are outposts which are being created in areas A and B, which are against Israeli law. From those outposts, the settlers are going intentionally creating friction with the Palestinians. What does that mean? By taking their herds, their sheep, their cattle into Palestinian private lands, into Palestinian private homes, private yards, daring Palestinians to try to defend themselves. And then the moment that one would try to defend himself, throw a rock, try to distance them, they have um, the justification to defend their lives now, the Jews, the settlers, and to shoot. And these have been the instances of murder in the past month. Um, and so Avi Blut got up and he spoke against these acts of these illegal acts and these acts of terror, and he spoke about the problematic nature of it. On the other hand, he defended the legal farms and outposts which have been created and are protected by um, by the Israeli army. But just to understand the dynamics, from we today we're visiting um, Palestinians who live right next to one of these legal farms next to Efrat. And they are complaining of constantly being terrorized by young people. It's not all of the people, it's not everyone who lives there, but some of the young people who will ride down the road and at 2 o'clock in the morning, blaring music or honking their horns in order to wake people up, who will stand on the road every morning threatening children and women who are trying to get to school and to work. Um, and these are people who are coming from the legal outposts. So there is a distinction between outposts that are legal and those that are illegal. But there is also a co-opting. There is also taking advantage of um, of the legal, which is coming out of these security interests, and then using it for this violent, radical, extreme messianic vision. That's what's going on, and that is why it's going on. As far as the ideology is concerned, um, as far as I see it. Um, and then the question, of course, is, well, what are we going to do? What needs to be done about this? And again, when we talk about what needs to be done, there are a lot of concrete things that need to be done. People who are in Israel, there are more and more people who are taking part in protective presence. Um, Unfortunately, the army isn't doing the job that the chief of staff of the army says is its job, which is also to protect Palestinians um, and to allow them to live their daily lives. Um, Again, I could speak from personal experience of going and doing protective presence for Palestinians who are trying to go and farm their lands. But what happens when those lands are near one of these outposts, illegal or illegal, and the people who live in those outposts claim to the army that they're feeling threatened by Palestinians who are coming to work their land. Well, in those cases, unfortunately, what I have seen is that the army takes the side of the settlers, even if they are living there against Israeli law, and then distance the Palestinians and don't allow them to work their own land. So Israelis are taking on regular Israelis are trying to take on the task of providing protection and protective presence um, to the best of their abilities. There's one wonderful group that I have volunteered with, which is called B'nai Avraham, which if somebody's looking to support the work of groups that are doing that, I would highly recommend supporting their work. Um, so those are things on the ground that are being done. And we're trying to think about this group that organized the conference is trying to raise more awareness to show people who are perhaps somehow still in denial that this is a problem. Um, Again, when the head of the of the Central Command of Israeli Military Central Command, Avi Blut, who is himself a product of not only religious Zionist educational system, but really the right-wing religious Zionist educational system, comes out and says that this is a problem. Not only is this a problem, but we're a hair's breadth away from disaster if we don't deal with this problem. It's hard to understand that people are still denying it, but we're still working on raising awareness. But I want to talk about the ideological question. I want to talk about the ideological question because, again, I want to go back to this dichotomy, the dilemma of settler violence that I began with. On the one hand, settler violence, that idea can discredit all of Zionism. On the other hand, it can say, well, if everything is violent, so it can justify any kind of violence that there is because this is what we need for our security. It can justify much more than should be justified. What's an alternative vision of Zionism, which on the one hand is going to affirm our right to life and to self-defense, but on the other hand is going to set clear moral limits? So for this vision, I want to read a response of Martin Buber to Gandhi's letter. And he says the following in 1939. Buber says, I belong to a group of people who, from the time when Britain conquered Palestine, have not ceased to strive for the achievement of genuine peace between Jew and Arab. By genuine peace, we inferred and still infer that both peoples should together develop the land without one imposing his will on the other. In view of the international usages of our generation, this appeared to us to be very difficult, but not impossible. The idea that both peoples are going to live in this land and both peoples need to find a way to live together. We considered it a fundamental point that in this case, two vital claims are opposed to each other, two claims of a different nature and a different origin, which cannot be pitted one against the other, and between which no objective decision can be made as to which is just or unjust. We considered and still consider it our duty to understand and to honor the claim that is opposed to ours, and to endeavor to reconcile both claims. We cannot renounce the Jewish claim. Something even higher than the life of our people is bound up with the land, namely the work that is their divine mission. But we have been and still are convinced that it must be possible to find some form of agreement between this claim and the other, for we love this land and we believe in its future. So I want to unpack this very important text of Martin Buber for a few minutes with you, because he says there are two claims. There are different types of claims: the claim of the Arab people, of the Palestinian people, the claim of the Jewish people to this land. He says, as far as the Jewish claim to this land, it's not just about the life of our people. It's higher than that. Meaning, Buber is saying the project of Zionism isn't just about protecting ourselves and protecting our own lives. If it were just that, then really this fundamental question of settler violence, of why do you put your life before other lives, would be irreconcilable. It would be very, very hard to justify and to say, well, why, because the Jews suffered, should Arabs suffer? Why, because the Jews need a place, should that be placed as a burden upon the Palestinian people? That was Gandhi's argument. But Buber's argument is that that's not what Zionism is about. Zionism is about something that is higher than that. Zionism is about a divine mission of the Jewish people. It's a divine mission, which is a universal mission. It's a divine mission which is about coming here in order to create a just society. We're part of the vision of that just society, part of the Jewish vision. The Jewish universal vision of that just society is a society which establishes one set of laws for the stranger and for the resident. It's a society which is based on justice and which is based on peace. That's the Jewish vision of this universal mission. So that is the Jewish claim. That is what animates our Jewish claim to this land. Buber explains we can't do that. We can't accomplish our mission in this world. We can't respond to that command, that higher command, which has always been commanding us. But in the years of exile, we weren't able to complete it. We weren't able to accomplish it. And it's only in Israel, it's only in the place where we are able to create our own society and to set our own mores and policies that we have the possibility of doing that. And so Buber argues we have a claim and we have a command that we can't renounce. But on the other hand, he says at the same time, we cannot deny the claim of the Arabs who have been living here, the Palestinians who also claim a right to self-determination. Buber in 1939 is not talking about that because that's not what's being talked about, what's being claimed, but he is talking about a binational state where there is equal rights for all residents. And I think this is difficult in the post-October 7th world. It's difficult after experiencing this trauma. It's difficult to hold on to this vision, and it's not a short path. It's clear that there is no shortcut to getting there. But to understand that loving this land and believing in its future is to work very, very hard to finding the ways to honor both claims. In other words, the ideological piece of what needs to be done here, the ideological response to what's going on, aside from all of the concrete and the political needs and responses, the ideological response is a Zionism which says that we don't have to insist either on the radical, revolutionary, messianic vision which says that we need to conquer this whole land and expel anyone who is not us and just live here as Jews. But it's also to express an alternative to the security lens and the security vision, which is able to commit acts of extreme violence and also to be co-opted by this more extreme vision. What needs to be done is to recommit and to reconsider this other vision of Zionism. This other vision of Zionism, which says that there's room here for all peoples and for all claims, and that is a Jewish vision, and that is a Jewish commitment, and that is not only about our survival, it's also critical for our survival, but that's part of what our destiny and that's part of what our mission is, and I think I want to say that it's part of what really our ultimate test is here. And I just want to share one last text from Rabbi Cook, the father, which for me is really a fundamental, a foundational text in terms of how I think about what we need to be doing. And I call this the ultimate test. Rabbi Cook writes in Orot HaMilchama during the First World War. We left world politics by coercion that had an inner will to it, until the blissful time will come when it will be possible to manage a kingdom without wickedness and barbarism. This is the time that we hope for. The delay is a necessary one. Our soul was disgusted by the terrible sins of managing a kingdom in the bad times. But the time is coming, it is very close, when the world will progress and we will be able to prepare ourselves, because it will be possible to manage a kingdom on the foundations of the good, of wisdom, honesty, and clear divine enlightenment. Rabbi Kook puts this out as a kind of a prophecy, a kind of something that is coming. But more than 100 years later, we can appreciate that really, more than a prophecy, this is a test, because there's always the possibility for people to say, we don't have the luxury of being moral. We need to worry about our own survival. We need to do whatever needs to be done in order to make sure that we're safe. And if what's being done is morally problematic, well, that's just the way it is. That temptation of managing a kingdom with wickedness and barbarism is a temptation that doesn't go away, that's never going to go away. It's a temptation that needs to be stood up to. We need to be able to say, as the Jewish people, that we are living in a world that we can set our policies by a moral vision, that we do not need, and that we must not, and that it is as existential for us not to manage our kingdom as it was done in the bad times. Because essentially what Rabbi Kook is saying is, when you understand this as a test, if that's what we're doing, then we're not ready. If that's the way that we're going to run Israel, it means that we're not actually ready for this project. It means that we're not meeting the challenge of what creating a Jewish state is supposed to be about. If we're just justifying to ourselves doing the things that were precisely things that were done to us, I have to say, I couldn't help but think as I sat today and I heard women, Palestinian women, speak about how they can't leave their house for fear of walking on the road and being attacked. I couldn't help but think of generations upon generations of Jewish people living in exile, that was exactly their experience, that they lived in fear of going out and being attacked by the Goyim. That was their experience. And it was so core and fundamental, certainly to Buber and to so many in the Zionist movement in founding it, that is not what we are going to create. That is not what we want to create. Echad Ha'am said in reaction to one act of Jewish terror in 1922, one act of Jewish revenge, Jewish revenge killing. He said, if this is the Messiah, let it come and let me not see it. He said, Yete velo achmine, let it come and let me not see it, because this isn't what our vision is. Again, the test is set before us. And I believe that we are up for it. And I believe that we have the power and we have the moral wherewithal to stand up to this test and to pass this test. But, I'll say there is no question in my mind, unfortunately, that the current government right now doesn't see things this way in terms of what the vision of Zionism and what we need to be doing is. But I also want to say that it's not clear to me that even the alternative government necessarily has this first and foremost in their mind. The idea that we are going to be defined, that our test is to stand up to these moral demands and to these moral challenges. And just as a final thought, to circle back to my byline as someone who founded an organization called Yanshoof, Yanshoof is um, about stopping Israel's arms sales um, to governments committing genocide and ethnic cleansing and the worst kinds of human rights violations. And and when I founded Yanshoof, my sense was really that in many ways this was at that time Israel's support of these things was the worst moral stain. It's really the exact same fundamental idea of everything that I've been talking about. Nowadays, looking at what's going on in my neighborhood outside of Efrat, in Judea and Samaria, with attacks on a daily basis of terrorizing people and making their lives uh, unsustainable, unlivable. I feel that those kinds of justifications that I heard all over the time around arms sales, people would say, yeah, it's not so nice, but this is what we need to do in order to um, create partnerships, and this is what we need to do in order to support ourselves, and we need all of the friends we can get, and we need all of the money we can get, et cetera, et cetera, and all of the kinds of justifications that I would hear for violating that very clear moral law, not to support people who are committing genocide. Unfortunately, I have to say that those kinds of justifications have now really come home to roost and were heard around the war in Gaza and the extremes that it was taken to, and were heard around what's going on now, in order to create justifications for things which are the deepest violation of what Israel aspires to be, of what we left world politics because we didn't want to take part in Rav Kook's idea, and what our divine mission is to create a state that shows that it is possible to have statecraft that is run with the foundations of good, of wisdom, of honesty, and clear divine enlightenment. So to summarize, what's happening and why is in some ways a reaction to the trauma of October 7th and to existential insecurity. And it is a co-opting of that insecurity by those who hold a radical, revolutionary, messianic vision, which is pulling and using the tools of people's fear in order to move its vision forward, but really to move us towards the brink of disaster. And what we need to do is to reaffirm our commitment to a Zionism that has a moral claim that we can defend, that has a moral vision that we can all be proud of and that we can work for. We need to understand that fighting for that Zionism isn't something that's anti-Israel. It's not something that's anti-Zionism. It's not something that's out um, to put a bad name on Israel. Fighting for that vision, for that divine mission, that is the deepest act of love that we can um, that we can express in this day and age, and we're all called to find the ways to express that love and to act on it. So thank you all very much, and now I'll take a look at the questions and also open it up to questions or to comments. I'll start to just respond to some questions, and if anybody wants to also open themselves up and to and to ask, you can feel free to do that. Um, as far as far as supporting the work of Solidarity Presence, so certainly financial support is appreciated, and raising awareness is important. For people who don't believe that settler violence is happening, I invite you to I'll get a link for you. Right now it's only in Hebrew, but if somebody wants to work on translating it, our conference, again, where we have the kippah wearing um, graduate of Eli, which is one of the more hardcore right-wing pre-military academies, the Avi Blut saying there is terror and you can't deny it, I think is really, it was an incredibly powerful statement. And so I will get the link for that in just a minute. Um, in the meantime, I'll take a look at as far as settler violence getting worse since the Iran War began. Um, during the Iran War, there was a spate of killings of Palestinians being killed in these incidents, which were claimed afterwards to be self-defense, but the context of the self-defense again was um, Jews in areas A and B where they are not allowed to be, um, provoking provoking attacks, doing what everything they can in order to provoke attacks, and then acting in self-defense. Many of these acts are being currently investigated. I wish I could say that I had faith that those investigations would bring about justice, but unfortunately, uh, I can't. Um, but it is getting steadily worse, and it seems that um, as as the the different wars stop, there are those who are the, it certainly feels that there are those who are very, very bent on um, blowing this powder keg up in Judea and Samaria, and creating another war and another front in Judea and Samaria. Um, that's that seems to be what is happening. Um, Evidence that the government from the top is aiding and abetting the violence. Um, there, um, there, yes, absolutely. On many on a number of levels. After our conference, where again the army, the person in the army who's in charge of these activities, um, came out and said that it is illegal for Israelis to be creating settlements in areas A and B, and it needs to stop. And members of Knesset need to stop encouraging it. Immediately after that happened, several members of the government, Limor Sonar Melech, Michael Levy, came out with public statements telling people, no, ignore that, go and create settlements in areas A and B. And again, have to understand these settlements in area A and B are very, very rarely, if ever, just pastoral, innocent people who are herding their sheep and not bothering anybody. But rather, it is, as one of the leaders of the movement, Elisha Yered, said, these are people who are trying to create chikuch. They're trying to create episodes of violence and provocation in order to get the response, in order to be able to respond. So that is one element of the government aiding and abetting. Another element, which has been seen a lot, is that very frequently the there are attacks being done with vehicles that were provided to outposts for the sake of maintaining their security. But the way that maintaining their security is translated is attacking Palestinians around them in order to create harta'ah, in order to create what they call um, what's the word? Harta'a. Um, Somebody will give it to me. Here's the link for our YouTube channel, and you have the all of the statements. Um, we have another few minutes here. We have another few minutes. Thank you for the solidarity presence link. Um, as far as the atrocities beginning before October 7th, yes, absolutely. That is absolutely correct. Um, they they started really many years ago. This movement of the hilltop youth and this ideology existed, um, but what did happen after October 7th is a few things. One of them is that public sympathy for it skyrocketed. In other words, the sense that this is something that's needed for our security, and the willingness of people to accept bad things happening in the name of that, because of that trauma, I think, at least as I read it, really increased very significantly. Um, whereas at the you could say when this government started in the very first months, there was the Hawara incident where after a terrorist attack, tens um, of settlers descended on a Palestinian village and set things on fire, and that was, in some ways, it was kind of condemned. It was condemned with a wink or with a nudge. But as far as the Israeli by people like Batal Smotrich, but as far as the Israeli population, it was seen as something much more problematic. Whereas today, things like that are happening literally every Shabbat. Literally every Shabbat, a Hawara type incident is happening, and I think a lot of what has normalized it is on the one hand is the trauma, and also honestly is people's exhaustion and their distraction because of going through war, because of their loved ones being in service or being out of service and being in Miluim and being under rocket attack. And so in many ways the war was co-opted in order to push forward this vision. I think Buber was. I think his outlook was very deeply dati. I would say more. And he was a very religious person. The definition of dati is orthodox. His vision of Israel was certainly a very religious vision. It's a religious Zionist vision that's found in other thinkers as well. In Rav Moshe Avigdor Amiel, it is found a book of his writings was just republished. Recommended. I'll grab it here for a minute. Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel talks about tzionut shel sinah v'tzionut shel chiba. You can't see it. Um, so there are voices within the religious Zionist history and also in the community. Um, uh, Deterrence, yes, deterrence is harta'a. And as far as the question of how long will it take Israelis to get past the fear of Palestinians, um, that's shelat she'elot, as they say. That has been the question from when Buber was writing about this almost 100 years ago, and before 100 years ago. I think that is from a religious point of view, um, as I see it, that our challenge in creating this state um, has been and will be how can we stand for a moral vision, not in ideal circumstances, not it's not Switzerland, it's not Canada where I grew up. We're in a place where there are realities of there are enemies which threaten us. I don't deny that. There are legitimate um, there's a legitimate need for self-defense, and there is a right and a moral justification to defend ourselves, and that is true. And how do we do that, and at the same time also stand for a moral vision and limit ourselves? I think that is precisely the project of Zionism. That is precisely the moral challenge of our time. I think Judaism, I think Jewish thought really has a tremendous Torah for that, for balancing that that tension. Um, not It's not pacifistic in the sense that Gandhi wanted us to. Gandhi in that letter, it's a crazy letter if you're not familiar with it. In 1939, he said German Jews need to practice nonviolent resistance to the Nazis. That's what they need to do. They need to nobly, nonviolently resist the Nazis, and that's crazy. That wouldn't work. That didn't work. That can't work. And Buber writes, we sometimes we have to fight evil, and we have to defend ourselves, and that is valid. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we can justify everything and anything, and um, we have to understand what our moral limits are. That's our work. That's our challenge. So thank you all so much. Um,
Yes, thank you so
Efrat,
much, Rabbi, for your talk today. I greatly appreciate your honest look at this and also the balance of what is religious responsibility and also the moral obligation that comes with that in both directions. It's a very polarizing topic, as I'm sure we all know. So it's great to see some honest discussion and have so many people here who are willing to hear your words and offer their own opinions. So, just before you all go today, I would just like to let you know about our upcoming programs. On the 19th, we have a talk from Rabbi Yonatan Nerel, and it's the topic of why is collaboration between faiths key to a sustainable future? And then the next week, we have on the 26th a book talk with Rabbi Zach Truboff, which is about his book Zionism in Crisis, Jewish Power and Moral Responsibility After October 7th. So, a very similar topic if you guys want to continue this further. And we have a Tav HaYosher Ethical SEAL training program at the end of May as well. We have a virtual session where you can become certified to volunteer and certify that kosher establishments are ethical businesses and that they treat their workers ethically. So if that interests you and you want to help that initiative in your area, feel free to look at our website and look at our newsletter and social media to get more information on signing up for that. And once again, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Rabbi Freedman, for your great talk.